The HOA Karen pulled a gun on my pregnant wife on Christmas. I'm not exaggerating. Snow was falling, lights flickered, and the quiet of the neighborhood was shattered by her screaming voice, echoing like a warning siren through the streets. My wife froze, clutching her belly, terrified, while the woman, red coat gleaming in the streetlight, aimed the gun without hesitation. "You don't belong here," she shouted. And just as panic set in, I stepped forward, my heart pounding, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could talk her down. That's when the footsteps came. Heavy, slow, and a deep, calm voice said, "Ma'am, put the gun down." The woman turned and her face drained. Standing there, behind my wife dressed as Santa Claus, was her husband, the person she least expected, the nightmare she couldn't escape. And that's when Christmas turned into chaos. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, I need to ask you something. Where are you watching this video from? Drop your city name in the comments right now. I read every single one, and it's always amazing to see how far stories like this reach. Whether you're in New York, Los Angeles, or somewhere small and snowy like Duluth, this story will hit differently because it's about fear, shock, and survival in the place you thought was safe. Now, before we continue, there's one important thing. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We share real-life stories with twists that make you gasp, moments that stay in your mind long after the video ends. And today's story is one of the most shocking yet. Picture this, a quiet, gated neighborhood on Christmas night. Snow is falling softly. Lights twinkle on every house. Everything seems perfect, peaceful. But in just a few moments, that peace shatters. The kind of moment that makes your heart race, your stomach twist, and your mind question reality. That's where our story begins. This isn't just a story about a crazy neighbor. This is about power, fear, and the unimaginable choices people make when they feel threatened. It's about a pregnant woman, a gun, and the shocking twist that no one in the neighborhood saw coming. By the time this story ends, you'll understand how quickly a joyful Christmas can turn into a nightmare, and how courage, love, and a single moment of bravery can change everything. Christmas Eve was supposed to be peaceful. My wife, 7 months pregnant, had spent the afternoon wrapping gifts, carefully placing them under our modestly decorated tree. Her belly, round and delicate, seemed to glow in the warm living room light. I watched her smile, tired but happy, thinking about the life growing inside her. The snow outside painted a perfect holiday postcard, turning our neighborhood into a sparkling wonderland. It should have been a night of laughter and warmth. But none of that mattered anymore. We had driven to Maplewood Estates, a gated HOA community just outside Columbus, Ohio, to visit some friends. I parked near the entrance. Late-night deliveries weren't allowed past 9 p.m. HOA rules. Everything in this neighborhood was controlled. Everything had a rule. And everyone here knew it. Too well. As my wife stepped out of the car, pulling her coat tighter, snowflakes dancing around her, I noticed a shadow moving across the street. Then came a voice, sharp, cutting through the silent night. "Hey, stop right there." The sound made my heart leap into my throat. I looked up. A woman was charging toward us, her boots crunching on the snow-covered street. Mid-40s, perfectly coiffed hair, red coat buttoned to the chin, phone in one hand. And then, the unthinkable, her other hand reached into her purse. A gun. Black. Cold. Shiny. Real. She raised it. And I realized with horror it was aimed at my wife. "Don't move," she screamed. "I've already called the police." Time slowed. My wife froze, her hands instinctively over her belly. "Please," she whispered. "I'm pregnant." The woman's face twisted in a mixture of rage and authority. "You people think you can just walk into our neighborhood?" she spat. "I'm HOA president. I protect this community." I stepped forward, trying to keep calm. My voice was firm but careful. "Ma'am, we live here." Her laugh was sharp, cruel, and completely unhinged. "Yeah? Then where's your residence sticker? Your access badge? Proof you live here?" Snow fell harder now, dusting the hood of the car, the gun, the street. Lights flickered in the houses, and I could see curtains twitching as neighbors peeked out, but no one dared intervene. And then I noticed it. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, rage, power. She had done this before, I realized, pulling people down to their knees with the mere threat of violence. "You think I don't know how this works?" she sneered. "People like you wait for holidays. Disguises. Fake smiles. But I see through it." My wife started crying quietly, her lips trembling. Her hands still clutched her belly. Then footsteps. Slow, heavy, calculated. A deep, calm voice broke the tension. "Ma'am, put the gun down." The woman spun around, eyes wild. "What did you say?" The man stepped into the streetlights, glow. Red suit, white beard, black boots, a Santa Claus costume. She scoffed. "Nice costume. You think this is funny?" He reached up, pulling off the beard and hat. Her face turned pale, almost white. Standing there, in front of all of us, was her husband. "Rick," she stammered, unable to speak. "I told you," he said, voice calm but deadly serious. "Never pull a weapon on innocent people." The gun slipped from her hand into the snow. My wife collapsed into my arms, shaking, tears mixed with snowflakes on her cheeks. Rick didn't move toward her. He simply stood there, imposing, controlled, like a predator who had cornered his prey. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't just Santa. He was the only reason she hadn't hurt anyone tonight. The woman's mind seemed to snap under the weight of realization. Everything she had built, her authority, her terror, crumbled. She stammered, her face flushing red with anger and humiliation. She began. Words failed her. My wife's sobs broke the tension. "Please, just leave us alone," she whispered. And just like that, the night fell heavier. The snow, once soft and magical, now seemed cold and accusing. This wasn't just an incident. This was a revelation. Rick knelt beside my wife, checking that she and our baby were safe. The woman who had terrified us for years, the self-proclaimed protector of Maplewood Estates, had just been disarmed by truth, by bravery, by love. But little did we know, this was only the beginning. Secrets buried in Maplewood Estates, truths the HOA had kept hidden, were about to surface. And none of us were ready for what came next. The night air was heavy with snow, but heavier still with the weight of secrets that had been lurking in Maplewood Estates for years. After the gun incident, the adrenaline still coursed through our veins. My wife clung to me, shivering not just from the cold, but from the realization that we had just stared down real danger and survived. Rick, calm as ever, kept a protective arm around her. He looked at me with that quiet intensity that meant one thing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Who is she really?" my wife whispered, her voice trembling. "Why? Why did she do this?" Rick sighed, rubbing his beard. "Her name is Margaret Henderson. Everyone calls her Karen around here, but she's not the sweet, cheerful type people assume. She's the HOA president, but more than that, she's the enforcer. The one who decides who belongs and who doesn't." I swallowed hard. I had heard rumors before, stories of neighbors being fined hundreds of dollars for minor infractions, of people being intimidated into silence, even forced to move out. But I never imagined it would escalate to pulling a gun on a pregnant woman. "She's done this before," Rick continued, his voice low. "Not with a gun, but with threats, manipulation, and fear. She thrives on control. She's the kind of person who believes the rules are hers to enforce, and if anyone challenges her, they pay." The snow fell harder. Lights from nearby houses flickered as if even the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. "Why us? Why tonight?" Rick's jaw tightened. "She saw you. Saw you as outsiders. And when she saw my wife alone, she acted impulsively. She's paranoid about new residents, especially young families. She thinks they'll disrupt the order she's built here. Christmas night just gave her the perfect cover." I looked around at the street, silent except for the crunch of our boots. The neighbors were watching from behind their curtains, probably wondering what kind of horror was unfolding in front of their homes. But no one moved. No one called her out. Fear kept them silent. "You need to know something else," Rick said, turning serious. The HOA isn't just about rules and fines. There's a history here. People have disappeared quietly under her watch. Not literally, but socially, financially, emotionally. Families have left overnight because she made life unbearable. And now she's escalating. My stomach twisted. Every story I had dismissed as gossip suddenly felt real. The charming houses, the perfectly manicured lawns, the glowing Christmas lights, all of it was a mask. Behind the mask was someone who wielded power like a weapon. Margaret, still standing across the street, finally picked up her phone. She dialed quickly. I realized with a shiver. She wasn't calling 911. She was calling someone who enforced her rules. Someone who would make sure her version of justice prevailed. Rick's eyes narrowed. She's dangerous, he said. Not just tonight. Every day she's like this. And she's smart. Too smart to get caught. That's why we need to be careful. I glanced at my wife, tears running down her cheeks. I whispered, "We can't let her do this to anyone else." Rick nodded. That's why I always dress as Santa during the neighborhood events. People expect jolly, harmless cheer. But it lets me see her coming. And tonight, it bought us a few seconds that might have saved her from doing something unforgivable. For a moment, the snow seemed to stop falling. It was like the universe itself was pausing, waiting to see what would happen next. Margaret's face twisted with anger and disbelief. She didn't understand that the facade of power she relied on had just been stripped away in front of dozens of witnesses, and although she still had her gun, her authority, and her pride, the psychological shift had already begun. Rick's words echoed in my mind. People like her can't handle exposure. Once they know they've lost the invisible control they think they panic. I realized then that this wasn't just about us. This wasn't just about a pregnant woman being threatened. This was about a system, a small, insidious system of intimidation and fear that had quietly terrorized an entire neighborhood. And tonight, for the first time, the system had been challenged. But the question remained, how far would Margaret go? And more importantly, how far were we willing to go to stop her? Because Maplewood Estates, with all its charm and holiday cheer, had secrets darker than the longest winter night. And we were just beginning to scratch the surface. The tension hung thick over Maplewood Estates like the heavy, wet snow clinging to the trees. The air seemed frozen, yet our hearts pounded in a rhythm that no winter chill could ever slow. My wife was trembling in my arms, still processing the fact that a gun had been pointed at her, and by someone who claimed to protect this neighborhood. The surreal terror of it all made every light in the neighborhood seem sinister. Margaret stood across the street, phone in hand, clearly trying to contact someone. Her eyes darted nervously, as if seeking backup from a hidden network of enforcers she had maintained for years. I realized in that instant that her power was not just the gun, the rules, or the threats. It was fear. Fear that kept the neighborhood silent. Fear that allowed her to dominate without consequence. Rick's calm presence next to my wife contrasted sharply with the chaos around us. He whispered, "Keep her talking. Don't make sudden movements. Let her feel in control, just enough to delay her." I nodded, trying to steady my own shaking hands. "Margaret, you don't need to do this." I called, my voice surprisingly steady. "We're neighbors. We've never done anything to you." She laughed, a brittle sound that carried across the quiet street. "Neighbors? Do you know what it takes to belong here? Do you understand the rules?" Before I could respond, headlights flickered on nearby, and a few of the neighbors peered cautiously from their windows. Curtains twitched, children clutched blankets, unaware of the full danger unfolding outside. Adults whispered, frozen by fear or by respect for Margaret's absolute control. Rick, my wife, whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "Everyone's watching. Everyone's judging. What do we do?" Rick's eyes hardened. "We expose her," he said, quietly. "The truth will protect you more than hiding ever could." Margaret's eyes narrowed as she noticed the neighbors watching. She scowled, clearly irritated by their mere presence. Her power depended on invisibility, no one seeing her cracks, no one daring to witness her madness. But tonight, she had been witnessed, exposed. Suddenly, from one of the nearby lawns, a light flicked on. An older man, a neighbor we had only greeted a few times, stepped out hesitantly. "Margaret, put the gun down," he said, voice trembling but firm. Margaret froze. Her confidence wavered. "What? You don't understand. I'm protecting this community." The man shook his head. "You're protecting fear, not people. Step away." I realized then that the neighborhood wasn't entirely paralyzed by fear. There were witnesses willing to stand up, quietly, one by one. And that subtle shift, one neighbor breaking the spell, was a crack that could turn into a chasm. Margaret's hand trembled. The gun, once steady, now wavered in her grip. Her mind raced. She could call for backup, but hesitation had set in. Rick took a cautious step forward, keeping his hands visible, still calm, still in control. "You see, Margaret," he said, voice low and unwavering, "Christmas isn't about rules. It's about family, compassion, and safety. If you can't see that, then you've lost. Right here, right now." And that's when the first twist hit, unexpected, shocking, and almost cinematic. A car door slammed down the street. Another figure appeared, stepping into the snowstorm, phone in hand. But this wasn't just another neighbor or police backup. It was someone Margaret had trusted, her own brother, a man we later learned had been complicit in many of her manipulations. He looked at her, disgust and fear, in equal measure. "Margaret, stop," he said sharply. "This has gone too far. Put it down." Margaret's face contorted in fury. Betrayal seared through her eyes. Her gun hand shook violently, and in that brief moment of indecision, the power she wielded for years, fear, intimidation, control, was slipping through her fingers. Rick didn't hesitate. He moved closer, keeping his posture calm, non-threatening, and strategic. He knew that any sudden action could provoke her into firing. But the momentum had shifted. Now, Margaret was reacting, not controlling. I held my wife tighter, heart racing. "What happens now?" I whispered. Rick glanced around, eyes scanning the snow-dusted street, the anxious neighbors, Margaret's trembling figure. "Now," he said, "we see the truth revealed, and the neighborhood sees it too. That's the only way to end this." And that's exactly what happened. One by one, neighbors stepped outside, emboldened by the presence of witnesses and Margaret's unsteady grip. Children peeked from behind hands. Adults spoke up, voices shaking but rising in chorus. "Step back. Lower the gun. It's over." Margaret faltered. Her authority, once absolute, was crumbling. She was alone in her rage, alone in her fear, alone in her desperation. And then, a second twist. The gun slipped from her hand, not due to Rick, not due to the neighbors, but because she lost her balance on the icy snow. It skidded across the pavement. Heart-stopping seconds passed as we all realized it was finally out of reach. Rick didn't move. He simply watched, controlled, allowing the chaos to resolve itself naturally. My wife sobbed with relief, our baby safe. The neighborhood exhaled collectively. The nightmare that had haunted Maplewood Estates for years had been confronted, witnessed, and, for the first time, publicly disarmed. But the story wasn't over. Margaret's threats, her network, and the twisted secrets of Maplewood Estates were far from fully exposed. Tonight had changed something, but only just. The snow continued to fall, covering the street in white, masking the chaos. Yet, underneath, the tension remained. The neighborhood would never see Christmas the same way again, and we had just opened a door that could never be closed. The snow kept falling, heavy and relentless, as if the universe itself was trying to bury the horrors that had unfolded on this Christmas night. But the truth, like snow underfoot, could not be hidden. It only pressed harder, leaving marks that would last long after the storm passed. We had barely taken a breath after the gun slipped from Margaret's hand when Rick turned to me, his face grim. "You need to know who we're really dealing with," he said. "Everything you've seen tonight, it's just the surface." I nodded, bracing myself. My wife clutched my arm, still shivering from the adrenaline. Rick began, voice low, almost confiding. "Margaret grew up in this neighborhood. She learned early that control equals survival. As a child, her father was strict and demanding, and she carried that mentality into adulthood. When she became the HOA president, she didn't just enforce rules, she weaponized them. Every neighbor, every family who moved in, she had a system to monitor, intimidate, and control them. For her, Maplewood Estates was her kingdom. I swallowed hard. But a gun pointing at a pregnant woman? Rick shook his head. That's escalation. Over the years, she's tested boundaries. Minor fines, social exclusion, threats. She always stayed just within the law, carefully measured. But tonight, her paranoia and obsession with control finally pushed her over the edge. She saw a pregnant woman as a symbol of threat, someone who could disrupt the neighborhood she believed she owned. Margaret's history was chilling. Families had quietly left the neighborhood, forced to sell their homes at a loss, emotionally and financially drained, simply because she decided their presence was inconvenient. Stories circulated about neighbors being harassed for the smallest infractions: mailboxes not aligned, decorations slightly off, a car parked in the wrong spot. And yet, she always maintained an image of respectability. She was the charming, articulate, confident HOA president everyone feared to challenge. Rick continued, and she had help. A network of enablers, a brother who covered for her, a few neighbors who whispered threats or spread rumors for her, even some local officials who didn't question her actions. That network allowed her to manipulate people quietly, maintain control, and escalate her tactics without ever being held accountable. I looked at her now, standing across the street, her face pale, her hands trembling, realizing her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Even her brother had confronted her. Even her network of fear was fraying. She underestimated us tonight. Rick said, quietly, more to himself than to me. She forgot that people can rise when enough witnesses see the truth. That's why we survived. Margaret's mind raced. Her eyes darted between the neighbors now cautiously gathering outside, Rick standing firm, and us holding our ground. For the first time, she was exposed, vulnerable in a way she had never been. And in that exposure, her desperation surged. Suddenly, she took a step back, muttering under her breath. She was calculating her next move, realizing that her usual tactics, intimidation, fear, secrecy, were failing. And that's when we noticed it. A sudden, sharp motion in her coat pocket. She had another weapon. Panic gripped my chest, but Rick stayed calm. He raised his hands slowly. Margaret, it's over. Drop it. You've lost. Her face twisted with fury and disbelief. The snow around her feet reflected her shaking form, like the physical manifestation of her crumbling empire. Every rule she had enforced, every life she had controlled, now seemed meaningless. One neighbor, braver than the rest, stepped forward again. Margaret, it's over. You can't keep doing this. The look in her eyes was almost animalistic. She realized her isolation, the collapse of her authority, and the imminent exposure of her secrets. And in that split second, the true scale of her darkness became apparent. We saw the final layer, the cold, manipulative mind that had made Maplewood Estates a place of fear. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was wielding rules like weapons. Every interaction, every threat, every act of intimidation had been premeditated. And tonight, confronted by the courage of ordinary neighbors, she was finally cornered. Rick stepped closer, his calm presence unwavering. You've had years to control people through fear, Margaret. But control isn't power. Power is responsibility. You've lost both tonight. For a moment, silence fell over the neighborhood. Snow continued to coat the streets, muting the chaos, but the tension remained thick and almost tangible. Margaret's breathing grew erratic. Her hands shook. She realized that the era of fear she had relied upon was over, at least for this night. And yet, the story wasn't done. Margaret had pushed too far. She had escalated beyond reason, and now consequences, legal, social, and personal, were inevitable. As the neighbors watched, the layers of her manipulation and control began to unravel. Secrets long buried under the guise of HOA rules were now exposed. The neighborhood, once paralyzed by fear, now saw clearly what had been hidden. And we realized something chilling. Margaret was capable of anything when cornered. But for the first time, she faced people who would not yield, witnesses who refused to be intimidated, and a family she could not harm without consequences. Tonight had changed everything. The snow continued to fall, but it couldn't bury the truth. The night's events marked a turning point, a shift from fear to courage, from silence to exposure, from control to chaos. And as we stood there, hearts still racing, we understood Maplewood Estates would never be the same. The night had descended into a strange, eerie calm. The snow continued to fall like a silent witness, blanketing the streets of Maplewood Estates in an icy white shroud. But beneath the calm, tension crackled like electricity. Every neighbor watching from their windows, every heart pounding, knew that this Christmas night was no longer ordinary. It was the night that fear confronted courage. Margaret's face was a mask of fury and desperation. Her carefully constructed empire of fear, intimidation, and manipulation was crumbling before her eyes. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from panic. She had underestimated one thing: the power of witnesses of truth, of people refusing to be intimidated. Rick stepped forward, his calm presence almost magnetic. He had become a silent pillar of authority in the chaos, a stark contrast to Margaret's erratic movements. "Margaret," he said steadily, "it's over. Put down. You've terrorized this neighborhood for years. Tonight, that ends." Margaret's eyes flicked to the neighbors now gathering outside. Their faces, illuminated by streetlights, were resolute. No one flinched. No one cowered. Every single one of them represented the countless hours, weeks, and years of silent intimidation she had imposed. And suddenly, her aura of control evaporated. You don't understand," she screamed, voice cracking with disbelief. I am the HOA. I keep this community safe." Rick shook his head slowly. "Safety isn't fear, Margaret. Safety is protection, compassion, and respect. You've confused control for security. But tonight, everyone can see the truth." Margaret's fury boiled over. In a sudden, reckless motion, she lunged toward the snowbank where her gun had skidded earlier. But her brother, the one who had confronted her before, stepped forward again, voice firm. "Enough, Margaret. This ends now." The neighborhood seemed to hold its collective breath. The air was taut with tension, the snow crunching under careful, deliberate footsteps. And then, another twist no one saw coming. From a side street, a police cruiser arrived, lights flashing red and blue, sirens muffled by the snowfall. A call had finally been made by a brave neighbor who refused to stay silent. Officers stepped out, weapons lowered but alert. Margaret froze completely, realizing the full weight of her actions. This wasn't just about intimidation anymore. She was facing legal consequences for the first time in her life. Rick stepped closer to Margaret, voice calm but firm. "It's over. Surrender. You've lost." Margaret's hands shook violently. Her brother looked at her one last time, disappointment etched into his face. She realized she was cornered, emotionally, socially, legally. The empire she had built with fear and manipulation was disintegrating before her eyes. And then came the final, shocking twist. Margaret, in her desperation, attempted one last manipulation. She raised her voice, trying to pit neighbors against each other, claiming that Rick and I had orchestrated a personal vendetta, that we were outsiders coming to destroy her life. But the neighbors didn't flinch. One by one, they spoke, recounting her years of intimidation, her manipulations, the family she had forced out. Their voices rose together, a chorus of truth that drowned out her lies. Margaret's face turned pale. Tears ran down her cheeks, not from remorse, but from the realization that she had no allies left. Her network of fear had collapsed. Every person she thought she controlled had witnessed the truth, had stepped forward, had defied her. Rick approached her slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "You wanted control, Margaret. You wanted fear. But real strength, real power, comes from trust, respect, and protection. Tonight, you lost all of it." Margaret collapsed onto the snow, sobbing uncontrollably. The gun lay inches from her hands, ignored, irrelevant, powerless. The Christmas lights, once symbols of festive joy, now illuminated the final unraveling of her empire. My wife wrapped her arms around me, shaking but safe. Rick placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, glancing back at Margaret one last time. The police approached, handcuffs ready. Margaret's brother stayed close, silent, but watching. The neighborhood, though shaken, had finally reclaimed their streets from years of silent terror. And in that moment, we realized something profound. Courage can disarm fear. Truth can expose deception. Witnesses can dissolve power built on intimidation. And even in the coldest, most controlled places, love and bravery can prevail. The snow continued to fall, muting the chaos, but not erasing it. Maplewood Estates would never forget this night. The night a pregnant woman survived, a tyrant fell, and a community finally reclaimed their courage. For my wife and me, this Christmas became a story of survival, resilience, and the shocking revelation that even in the face of danger, ordinary people can confront extraordinary fear. The night air was cold, but the weight on our shoulders was heavier. Maplewood Estates, once serene and picture-perfect, had been exposed for what it truly was. Streets that gleamed with holiday lights now bore silent witness to chaos, fear, and ultimately courage. The gun was gone, Margaret's control was gone, and yet the impact of the night lingered. Margaret had been escorted to the police cruiser, her face pale, streaked with tears, and finally realizing the depth of her actions. Years of intimidation, manipulation, and terror had caught up with her. But even in defeat, she radiated a chilling intensity, the kind that made you question whether she had truly been defeated or whether she was merely recalculating. Rick stayed close to us, his calm presence a reassurance against the lingering tension. "This isn't just about tonight," he said quietly. "This is about undoing years of fear. People have lived in her shadow for too long. The fact that you survived, that you stood together, is the first step toward reclaiming this neighborhood." The neighbors who had silently watched from behind curtains began to emerge. Some apologized for not acting sooner. Others shared stories of Margaret's tyranny, confirming everything Rick had told us. It was surreal, the facade of Maplewood Estates peeling away to reveal years of hidden suffering. And then came the shocking twist that no one expected. Margaret's brother, the one who had confronted her earlier, stepped forward, looking at the officers. "She wasn't acting alone," he said, voice shaking. "There's more. Other residents, other officials who helped her enforce fear, cover up violations, manipulate outcomes. You've only scratched the surface." The news spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Fear had been replaced with unease. What we had witnessed that night was just the beginning. The system Margaret built was bigger, deeper, and more insidious than anyone had imagined. We returned home, still shivering from adrenaline and snow, holding my wife close. The baby kicked softly, a reminder of life's persistence even in the darkest nights. Christmas had been anything but peaceful, yet in some ways it had delivered a miracle. Survival, truth, and courage had prevailed. Rick smiled faintly. "This will be a Christmas you never forget," he said. "But remember, courage isn't just surviving a night like this. It's standing up afterward, making sure no one else lives in fear." The following days were filled with police investigations, media attention, and whispers among the neighborhood. Margaret's actions were documented, her accomplices identified, and legal consequences began to unfold. Families who had suffered silently found validation. Fear began to lose its grip, and then the final twist, the one that even we hadn't anticipated. A letter arrived at our doorstep. No return address. Inside, in a shaky but unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "You've won tonight, but Maplewood Estates will always remember. I'm watching. M." Chills ran down my spine. Margaret wasn't gone. She was thinking, planning, and waiting. Yet in that same moment, I realized something profound. Even if she returned, even if fear attempted to creep back, the truth now existed. Courage had been witnessed, documented, and shared. Her power had been shattered in front of an entire community. Christmas morning, we gathered together, just my wife, the baby, and me. The lights twinkled. Snow covered the streets. But it wasn't the perfect postcard Christmas we had imagined. It was better. It was real. Survival, justice, and bravery had made it memorable. And as the final snowflakes fell, I knew this story wasn't just ours. It was a lesson that even in the darkest nights, even against fear built over years, courage, truth, and unity can prevail. So now, I turn to you, watching the story unfold. Have you ever faced someone who tried to intimidate you? Have you ever felt powerless, only to discover that witnessing and standing together could change everything? If this story shocked you, inspired you, or made your heart race, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below, tell us where you're watching from, and share your own story of courage. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this, shocking, emotional, and full of twists, are just the beginning. There's more to come. Stay brave, stay vigilant, and remember, courage always wins, even against the darkest fear. This Christmas, we learned something unforgettable. Fear can be confronted, tyranny can be exposed, and even in the snowiest, darkest night, hope and courage shine brighter than any holiday light. If this story shocked you, made your heart race, or reminded you that courage can triumph over fear, don't keep it to yourself. Comment below. Tell us which city you're watching from, share your own experiences of standing up against injustice, or even just let us know how this story made you feel. And if you want to see more stories like this, real-life, emotional, twist-filled tales that keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss a shocking revelation, a tense showdown, or a story of survival that will stay with you long after the video ends. Remember, courage is contagious. By sharing this story, commenting, and staying connected, you're helping others see that even in the darkest nights, fear can be confronted, truth can be revealed, and bravery always wins. So don't wait. Subscribe, comment, share, and be part of the community that stands up against fear, one story at a time.